Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to what is clearly a live edition of Ask That. It is Wednesday, March 7th, and with me today I have Thomas Cudd. Tom, how are you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good today.
God bless you. So before we get rolling, why don't you give everybody a quick introduction on who you are and what you do?
So, as you said, I'm Tom Cudd. I am a systems architect for a marketing agency in Kansas City, Missouri called VML. My team and I, we work on trying to operationalize some different marketing technologies for ourselves, for our customers, our clients. I'm really focused in the DevOps space, and I've spoken at a couple conferences about various DevOps methodologies and practices, and been able to kind of evangelize that within my own organization and a little bit of thought leadership outside of it. So, DevOps all the things, right?
DevOps all the things. So we're going to have, and we've been going back and forth on Skype a bit, we are going to have the DevOps Smackdown of conversations here. It's coming on a day where it's kind of a hot topic for me. So let's start with just putting a quick definition around DevOps in your words, because I think there's a lot of people who have their own thought of what it means, but let's just set a definition so we're speaking to that.
Well, to me, like DevOps is really just an extension of existing like agile methodologies, but just into the operationalized space. So, we look at its culture and process and tools, but it's really about the people. So it's a collaborative space in which operations teams and development teams and QA and security and the business work together to, increase the flow of work through the system.
So, I mean, clearly that's garbage because that doesn't happen. So, let's talk about the together piece. Work together. So, when do you think the DevOps, and I really hate using that term because, like you said, it's a cultural thing, but when do you see that work falling into play in, let's just say, a greenfield app? So we're starting new. So where does that start? Where do they start to get involved?
Well, if you have a dedicated operations team, work in DevOps space begins as soon as the scope is signed. As long as there is someone with, work to be done on the development effort, there's usually work to be done on the operations effort. Now, I know that when you're doing development and a lot of small startups usually have someone that's doing the DevOps part or the operations part of the work. But when you scale up, at some point, there has to be someone with a bit of a specialization around operational capabilities, whether that's cloud or virtualization or containers. They should be in the room with the developers when, the sprint planning is happening for, an agile project.
Yeah, they should. And so, so you can't, trying to be as politically correct as I can be. I mean, you can't
don't worry about it.
You can't get away from this work, right? Like the servers, they have to exist. They have to get stood up, and they have to get designed. And there are requirements on both ends of the spectrum, right? There are requirements that the development team has, and there are requirements that the operation team has. And all too often, I see a lot of tension between the two. I really don't understand why, because I feel like both worlds don't want to do the other person's job, but yet there seems to be this tension. Can you speak to that at all?
Well, it really comes down to having a system of trust in place. When you're hiring the best people and you're working with the best people, you make the assumption first that they know what they're talking about and they know what they're doing. when you come at it from that perspective, what ends up happening is that the people defer to the expertise of the others around the room, hopefully at least in some instances. And
Sure.
when there's a space where there's a disagreement or arguments, well then, that's when you can just hash it out. But all that to say, it's easy to say, it's hard to do. It usually ends up happening that people that have spent a lot of time in the proverbial trenches are the ones that gain trust with each other and how they work together. Like to my experience specifically, I didn't really start evangelizing it in my own organization until I had worked with most of the developers on really difficult projects and we'd made lots of mistakes.
Sure.
But they saw that we learned from that and we could kind of trust each other to make good decisions moving forward.
Sure. Yeah. So let's dive a little bit into the work. I mean, what type of work do we typically think of when we're talking about DevOps? I mean, what are we just setting up servers or?
Well, to me, it starts, we look at various DevOps maturity models, and it really starts with the first steps are really finding small pieces to automate. We're trying to buy back time. That could be things like code synchronization or small builds or deploy processes, anything you could write a script for. Anything that you're doing a lot of, and I'll just put it plainly, about 5 years ago, we figured out that we spent on our team about 60% of our time doing release management. And by release management, I mean literally one of the people on my team logged into a server, ran an SVN switch to a tag, and verified that it wasn't on fire, and then sent it to QA.
Yep.
So those types of things we figured out. This is something we're doing over and over and over again. We had somebody leave that was doing that full time and said, no one wanted to do that job.
Yep.
So we figured out how to script it. We made that process just a bash script, put it into Jenkins, gave the button over to the developers, and what we saw happen is like 60% of our time was bought back to start doing more things. It's a snowball effect in terms of buying us time to do even more grandiose things.
Yeah, I agree. I am for a big proponent of automate all the things. We have dumb computers which exist for that very purpose. To do things faster than we can do them. So why would we not leverage them to do these things? And I often feel like, and tell me if you think I'm right on this or not, but I often feel like we think of operations as this operational thing. Maybe it's because it's in the word, but got to set up the server, got to change the certificate, got to plug the network cable in, but not so much of the design of the architecture of the thing we're building in the first place. Should it be encrypted? What encryption level should it be? Have you guys thought about this network? Because we're going to span it out this way, and the latency in Germany. I feel like those things get left to when it costs way more time to do something than if we would have done it up front in the first place.
Right. And part of what happens when you're saving yourself this time on some of these littler things, that when those fires come up, when there's a big problem, you can attack those a little bit more vigorously. So, being in the room only happened when you have time to be in the room. So I can't go to a meeting. I'm, putting a new cert out on all the servers. That's an absurd thing to have to worry about. But, we take the steps of, okay, so we've automated some little processes. Now we're automating the entire build pipeline. Now we can start investing our time into infrastructure as code, Puppet or Chef or Ansible. And now we're actually able to solve business problems like, that the client is coming to us saying, our time to market is really bad. We do one deploy a month, and we can't get things turned around fast enough, and our backlog is 2 years long. How do we start doing? We go from one deploy a month to buying our time to create the process that does like 5 deploys a day.
Yeah.
You know, so you know, you start to get buy-in from the business to see that the work you're doing is not just a cost center, it's a value add.
Sure.
And you know, when you've got business buy-in, that's almost as important as the developers you're working with, you know, buying into your processes as well.
So what does getting business buy-in look like?
Business buy-in looks like you've got ops people or DevOps people scoped from the beginning of a project because they know basically infrastructure and automation, engineering, and that sort of effort is upfront going to save you time. So there's going to be a lot of time front loaded on those projects. You know, you've got maybe a 6-month project, 6-month engagement of, you know, like 10 developers, but you have one operations engineer, you know, for the first 3 months of that, and then that you know, the work tails off as the project gets closer to launch.
Sure. I mean, is it fair to say that a DevOps person's job is to automate themselves out of a job?
Yes. I mean, I tell the people on my team, I'm like, if you don't have the capacity to do what you're being asked to do next, that's a problem. That means you haven't automated enough. I say we're not trying to automate ourselves out of a job. We're trying to automate ourselves into the next new, more interesting job. Like, I got a couple of people on my team that want to, you know, do more with Kubernetes and containers and you know, deploying out, you know, to some of these container clouds, but they don't have time. I'm like, well, what do you see in your day to day that you could script or offload or process in such a way that, you know, you'll allow the developers to do it themselves? What can you do to buy yourself the time to do this next new cool thing? It's an investment.
Yeah, totally. I love it. Where I'm gonna use the S word here, and I know this is a bad word, bad word. But where does support fit into DevOps, fit into development?
Well, you know, this sort of managed services that happen after something actually hits market or launches. We expect the developers to be on the same, you know, paging systems or on-call systems as we are. So, you know, if we get an alert that's escalated all the way up to the first level severity, we'll have a technical architect or software engineer on the line at the same time as an operations person. We're dealing with you know, pretty complex systems, whether they be, you know, web or mobile or back-end services that, you know, are being ingested. So you have to have the people who know the application and how it's supposed to function on the first line of support, first line of defense as the operations team. Now, I'm fine with my operations team getting that first call and saying, that's a disk space issue, so let's just, you know, go have the hosting provider take care of it, clear some logs, whatnot. But, you know, once we get past that point, we expect other people to come in and help us.
Yeah, it's a hard. As you know, there was a long time ago, I thought, you know, things would only ever get simpler, and you know, they foolishly had thought, well, you know, XML is we're just gonna kind of describe our jobs away and things will just magically happen, right? And the reality is, I think it's gotten drastically more complicated than it used to be, you know, with NPM and all the different clouds and the different containers, and even just a simple web app can be way more complicated than it necessarily needs to be. CDNs and
the single page apps that we build for some of our clients ends up being some of the more interesting, complex solutions that, I mean, you think a single page app, it's just one page.
A single page. It's only one. It's totally fine.
The code for that, I mean, requires the same level of build, deploy, unit testing, quality assurance, security testing as a, you know, full, you know, back end solution.
Sure. How about testing? How often do you find yourself or find a DevOps group interacting with a testing group? I mean, we've been talking really developers and DevOps playing together, but how about the testers?
So we're doing well, to be honest, what happened years ago when our organization went through sort of a DevOps transformation, we left QA in the dust. We what ended up happening is we clobbered them. So like if you look at like a Kanban board, what ended up happening is we recognized that we had created a new bottleneck. We went from dev to ready to deploy, and then QA backlog just went out the window. Yep. What we realized is we should have brought QA along with us in that process. And so now, I have part of my team is responsible for making sure that the development part of the flow happens. But then there's another couple of people who are specialized in working with the QA tools. So I have an ops person working with not just a QA tester, but more of a QA automation engineer on the QA team. So they're creating the automated scripts and using Total Validator and WebLink Validator and all of the unit tests that they write. And we've created the same automation framework for the QA team as we had for the development team. So it kicks off, one thing after another. And then there's always a visual inspection that happens near the end of the process. But we try to keep that, as anything that can be automated, we try to do it before then. Sure.
Do you find the work that's happening with the testing team feeding into the support and regression side of like the day-to-day, the operational side of things?
Absolutely. What we've figured out is that a robust testing scheme has actually reduced our production alerting and issuing, down the line. So, some performance, some, user behavior, like we'll capture some general user behavior and we'll replicate that, with our tests. And so that when we are testing, in a QA environment, we have what a user's actually doing, and then we see if that fails. Well, then we know as soon as that's going to get production, the call center is going to get calls from the end user saying, this is all broken, nothing works. So we're trying to prevent that from happening. We on one project about a year ago, we were getting calls. I was getting paged about 3 times a week on off hours. Now maybe once a month for the same project.
Nice. So, before I get into tools, let's talk about like what's the hard stuff? Like, what's the kind of stuff that keeps you up? Where's things going? Where you've got it figured out. You got a good culture. You got DevOps. Like, what's the stuff that gets you excited?
So, what I really like seeing is just putting the people who can do the work as close to work as possible. What we found is that the culture thing is so critical, because when we have an organization that they'll go through a postmortem after various severity level issues, and they'll think, oh, we need to add a new process or procedure around this. And what really should have happened is that they need to put the people who are doing the work closer to the decision that's made,
sure,
in the system. So, like how do we do that? Well, there are a whole bunch of.
I can hear your clients in the background. Yeah,
yeah, toddlers are
right.
clients too. So
that's right.
So we have sorry, that just completely derailed me. But
no, it's awesome because this is the real world, right? The server's down, the certificate. We forgot to renew the certificate, and my kid is back there like screaming all the hell.
Exactly.
And I just. There's not enough TV monitors going on at the moment.
It's happy stuff. So, what we found is that people who figure out how to automate something a little bit more closely, to the actual decision maker. So like, we'll have a Jenkins instance that pushes, the unit test closer to the developers, or sure. We'll do things like adding, linters to even a pre-commit, or we will do some unit. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I love it.
we'll do some code analysis. So it's like we're trying to push the work closer to the people actually doing the work, if that makes sense. So like we have a team that's created vagrant images for the developers so that they can actually deploy into a local image what they're working on that's going to mimic what's in production. So trying to push the work further left so that when it actually gets out there, it's, has a better likelihood of being, functioning.
Sure. It's funny you use the kind of left to right analogy. I've always thought it as it's most relevant in one's mind. If I could get the test and the build to fail immediately after the person checked it in, then the chances are they'll be able to fix it fast. Whereas once it's checked in and they've moved on, we're on to another thing, and it's like I context switch gone. I've left the station.
Yeah, we're trying to get it to where the developers and the teams that are doing the coding can actually get it fixed before it even checks in.
Yeah. Well, yeah, totally. Yeah. The closer you get it down the stack, the better. So let's talk tools for a bit, and I know this can go a lot of different ways, but there's a lot of stuff. You mentioned some build tools, Jenkins, Travis, Ansible, granted not build stuff, Kubernetes, Docker. Like what are like the top tools today that we should feel comfortable using?
Well, we base our entire methodology basically around Jenkins.
Okay.
What we're beholden to our clients' architecture and technical stacks. So we have clients that use PHP, .NET, Java, various CMSs, and all sorts of different written languages with front end. And the thing that ties it all together is that they all can build and deploy with Jenkins. And so we've created a homogeneous process, even though the technology underneath is not homogeneous. We're trying to make sure that anybody that joins the team can, even if they're switching tech stacks, can do some of the initial work and investigation on a problem or something without having to know the underlying tech that's used, because they have the understanding of here's where the process is going to live and here's what it's going to do. It's going to always kick off a QA deploy here. The pipelines look the same, even though the steps underneath it may be different. We're using a lot more Groovy, and so my my operations team is starting to look a little bit like Java developers. They're reviewing each other's code and looking at and pairing with each other to solve problems. And so it really looks interesting to see, see the same processes that, our Groovy code is in source control, and, we're doing pull requests and we're using Git flow the same way that the developers are to check in our code.
I'm surprised you said Groovy. Why not Go?
Just more experience on the team with Groovy. We pivot a lot. Every year it could change. We've done a lot of work with Puppet in the past. We're probably doing some pivot into Chef right now. It's just we're really, really tech agnostic because of that client demand. The client roster is vast.
So how do you say you pivot every now and then? So what are some of the decisions that you make when you decide to pivot? Like what wall are you coming up against? And
the most common wall is someone gets a new job and they have the biggest chunk of experience. We're trying to cross train a little better so that when we lose someone, we don't lose all of the knowledge and experience. So like we had a guy that knew Puppet really well and went on to Silicon Valley to get a job out there. And so, it also helps us feel good knowing that, people from Silicon Valley are trying to steal our people. But, so like when that happens, we figure out, we need to either shore up our knowledge in this or look at evaluating what does the team know best right now, and do we pivot off of that?
Do you find that most of your guys and girls like to do the coding aspect of it, or do they like the operational kind of infrastructure-y side more?
We used to have what I call like heroes that just like to go in and mix things up and fix
Yep.
things whenever there was a fire, but they didn't like all the, the process and that looked like development, because it requires a lot of calm, long periods of thinking about a problem and then solving
Yep.
it.
Yep.
So we, the type of team has really changed over the years, and now everyone really enjoys that aspect of it. They like well, I mean, it's not always 9 to 5. Some people come in sort of early, some
Sure.
late,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
they
yeah.
like the sort of stability of
Yep.
knowing that they're going to come in, they're going to work on a particular problem most days,
Yep.
and sometimes they're going to have to just roll with it. And then we're trying to again solve more interesting, complex problems rather than just pressing buttons.
Yeah, no, I that's a kind of proactive versus reactive, right? When you're in the reactive state, you're playing defense all the time. Everything's a fire. You're triple booked on your calendar, and you really can't see like the forest through the trees. And taking that step to be proactive and automating dumb tasks. I mean, this is really the kind of epicenter of why DevOps became such a thing back in the day. Of like,
Yep.
let's just be smarter about what we do, and
Yeah.
life will be better. Like,
Yep.
great. We created our own problem. Let's fix it. So, all right. Before my last question, I just want to extend some gratitude towards you and say thank you for not only being on this, but thank you for putting your stuff out there. You've got a bunch of writing about DevOps on your blog and in other places, and I think that it's fantastic when we share and ultimately help one another. I know there's a lot of time wrapped up in trying to do something like that. So on behalf of me and everybody who's ever read anything of yours, just simple little thank you.
Appreciate
with
it.
that, my last question to you then is, somebody's got a team, they're not happy with the current state of DevOps, whatever, like, what would be your advice to them to get it either better in their culture or to bring it into their culture, learn more? Like, what would be your piece of advice?
Well, I would say the biggest piece of advice, and this helped me more than anything, is find a partner to work with, on whether across the aisle or on your team. So in both scenarios, one, I have guy that's now my current supervisor, my boss. He and I really worked together to try to instill the proper culture with the org that we had, and then you've got to find a developer that's willing to work with you on these issues.
Sure.
To see, hey, I want to actually solve a problem that you're having. Kind of explain to me what you're facing every day, and that's giving you the biggest headache and challenge. Actually trying to solve someone else's problem. It requires some empathy, to know that other people have. You got to think outside.
Yep.
Yeah, I know as operations people, we have our own set of problems and we're trying to solve our own issues, but you're going to find that solving other people's problems is going to help you with your own issues, because what you're doing is you're making it so that a developer that can check in his own code and run his own code analysis and do his own unit testing is going to not bug you for other things.
Sure.
So that you can go back and say, all right, great, we solved this problem. Now what's next? What's the next big thing? And just finding the right people to work with is pretty critical.
I love it. That is great advice. And with that, we'll leave it there.
All right.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. If you have questions for Thomas, actually, where can people find you? I didn't even ask that.
I'm on Twitter at Tom Cudd. That's the best way to reach me. I answer a lot of DevOps questions on there.
All right. So with that being said, you know where to get a hold of Tom. We will put the links and everything in the description below. Share it. I'd love to see from you what you think some of your hot things are, maybe the tools, whatnot. Feel free to comment, and we'll see you next time.
All right.